The compound gates slid shut with a metallic whisper. Teresa Martin thought no one noticed her slipping out exactly at closing time again, but someone did. From behind the tinted windows of his armored black sedan, Jones Carrillo watched her rush toward the street, mascara streaking down her cheeks, that thick yellow envelope clutched against her chest like a lifeline. She didn't wait for the staff shuttle. She didn't ask for a ride. She moved with purpose, almost like she was racing against time itself. And that's when the most feared man in Newark made a decision he never made before. He followed. Street after street, block after block, through neighborhoods where even his enforcers traveled in pairs. The gold chain around his neck caught the streetlight as he trailed behind, silent as death. Something was desperately wrong. He could sense it the way a predator senses blood. She finally disappeared into a forgotten part of the city, the kind of place where broken dreams lived in basement apartments and hope died quietly. He parked 3 blocks back, stepped out into the freezing night air, and tracked her to a condemned building with boarded windows and graffiti-scarred walls. What he heard through that cracked basement window hit him harder than any sniper's shot ever could. No conspiracy. No betrayal. No stolen empire secrets. Just a cramped room with peeling paint, a child's fragile cough echoing off bare walls, and Teresa Martin on her knees, weeping as she whispered a desperate prayer. "Please, just let me get enough to cover the next chemo appointment." The envelope in her hands wasn't blackmail. It wasn't evidence. It was a medical bill she couldn't pay. Jones Carrillo froze. His tattooed hands clenched. A sensation he hadn't felt in decades rose in his chest, something dangerously close to shame. He had expected a rat. He had expected lies and schemes. He never expected this. Stay with me until the end, because the choice this mafia boss makes doesn't just save one life. It transforms his entire bloody empire. Before we begin, hit subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only manipulators and trolls won't subscribe. Comment where you're watching from, and let's get into it. Jones Carrillo didn't believe in second chances. Not for his enemies. Not for his soldiers. And certainly not for anyone who worked inside his fortress. The compound sprawled across 5 acres of prime Newark real estate, protected by 12-foot walls topped with cameras that never blinked and guards who never slept. Inside, Italian marble gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Leather furniture worth more than most people's homes sat untouched in rooms designed to intimidate. Every surface reflected power. Every corner whispered control. This wasn't a home. It was a throne room built from blood money and fear. And at the center of it all stood Jones himself, a 45-year-old monument to violence. Tattoos crawled up his neck and across his hands, each one marking a territory claimed, a rival eliminated, a lesson taught in permanent ink. His presence alone could empty a room or fill it with nervous silence. Men twice his size looked at their shoes when he passed. Business partners signed contracts without reading them when he placed the pen in their hands. Trust was a luxury Jones Carrillo had eliminated from his vocabulary 30 years ago, the same night his mentor put a bullet in his father's head at a family dinner. Since then, every smile had been a potential threat. Every loyalty was temporary. Every person in his orbit existed under constant, invisible surveillance. So when Teresa Martin appeared 6 months ago through a vetted agency, Jones treated her the same way he treated everyone else. He watched. He tested. He waited for the inevitable betrayal. But Teresa was different in ways that first intrigued him, then unsettled him. She was efficient to the point of invisibility. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, cleaning, organizing, never speaking unless spoken to, never meeting his eyes for more than a second. Her uniform stayed pristine. Her schedule stayed perfect. She asked for nothing, complained about nothing, and somehow managed to anticipate needs before Jones himself recognized them. For 5.5 months, she was flawless. A machine in human form. Then something changed. It started small. A tremor in her hands when she served his morning espresso. red-rimmed eyes hidden behind quick nods and efficient exits. She began leaving exactly at closing time, not a minute early, not a minute late, clutching her bag against her chest like it contained state secrets. Her movements became rushed, almost frantic, even as her work remained impeccable. Jones noticed everything. It was how he'd survived this long. He watched Teresa's mask crack a little more each day. He saw the way she'd pause in empty hallways, shoulders shaking, before straightening and continuing. He caught the sound of muffled crying from the staff bathroom. He observed how she'd flinch when anyone approached too quickly, as if expecting violence instead of conversation. And then there was that envelope. That thick, yellow envelope she clutched every single evening as she rushed toward the gates. Paranoia whispered its familiar poison. She was selling information. She was working for the feds. She was planning something. The tears were theater. The desperation was disguise. Jones Carrillo didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in threats. And Teresa Martin, perfect and efficient, and now visibly breaking apart, had become the most dangerous kind of unknown. So he made the call he always made when something didn't add up. He decided to find out exactly what she was hiding. Jones summoned her on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 minutes after she'd arrived for her shift. "Teresa. My study. Now." The intercom made his voice sound like judgment itself. Through the security camera mounted in the hallway, he watched her freeze mid-step, watched her hand grip the cleaning caddy until her knuckles went white, watched her take 3 steadying breaths before she moved toward his door. Good. Fear meant guilt. Guilt meant secrets. Secrets meant betrayal. She entered his study with her eyes down, hands clasped in front of her pristine uniform. The room smelled of leather and expensive tobacco. Behind his desk, Jones sat perfectly still, tattooed fingers steepled under his chin, gold chain catching the morning light streaming through bulletproof windows. He let the silence stretch until it became suffocating. "You've been with me 6 months," he said finally, voice low and measured. Almost perfect performance. Almost. "Thank you, sir." Her voice barely qualified as a whisper. "I didn't say it was a compliment." He leaned forward, and she flinched. "You've been leaving exactly on time. Every day. For 3 weeks now." "Where are you going?" "Home, sir." "Just home." "Home." Jones let the word hang between them like an accusation. "That envelope you carry. What's in it?" Her eyes widened fractionally. She hadn't realized he'd been watching that closely. Just personal papers, sir. Nothing important." "Show me." I don't have it with me right now." "That's interesting." "Because you've carried it every single evening for 23 consecutive days." He stood slowly, walked around the desk with predatory patience. Teresa took an involuntary step backward. "I don't tolerate lies under my roof, Teresa. I also don't tolerate theft. So let me ask you one more time. What are you hiding?" "Nothing, sir." "I swear." "I'm not." "You're shaking." Jones stopped 3 feet away, studying her like a specimen under glass. "You're terrified." "People are usually terrified for one of 2 reasons in my presence. Either they're about to betray me, or they've already betrayed me." "Which is it?" "Neither." The word came out desperate, raw. Tears spilled over her cheeks, mascara running in dark streams. "I haven't done anything wrong. Please, I just need this job. I can't lose this job. Please." Jones saw it then. The lie was there, yes, clear as daylight in her trembling voice. But something else lived behind that lie. Not defiance. Not calculation. Not the cold, nervous energy of someone planning to destroy him. This was different. This was the terror of someone drowning, someone clinging to a life raft in a storm that wouldn't stop. This was the desperation of a person fighting something far bigger than Jones Carrillo. And that didn't make sense. "Get out," he said quietly. "Back to work." Teresa fled like he'd fired a warning shot. Jones returned to his desk and opened his laptop, pulling up her personnel file. Address. Emergency contacts. Background check. Everything appeared clean. Everything appeared ordinary. Which meant nothing, because people who wanted to hurt him were trained to appear ordinary. But that fear in her eyes haunted him. It felt wrong. It felt personal. He made a decision that broke his own rules. No delegating. No soldiers. No intermediaries who might miss the crucial detail. Whatever Teresa Martin was hiding, whatever was in that envelope, whatever was making her fall apart piece by piece, Jones was going to discover it himself. He pulled up the tracking app connected to the compound's exit cameras and marked Teresa's employee vehicle. Tonight, when she left clutching that yellow envelope and those devastating secrets, he'd be right behind her. If you can't stand people like Jones Carrillo, comment "I stand for justice" and smash the like button. He represents all that is wrong with a world of privilege and pain. Only those who support bullies will stay silent. The temperature dropped to 28 degrees that Tuesday night, cold enough to turn breath into ghosts and streets into ice. Jones watched from his sedan as Teresa emerged from the staff entrance at exactly 6 p.m., yellow envelope pressed against her chest like body armor. She wore a thin jacket, inadequate for the weather, and moved with the same frantic urgency he'd observed for weeks. No hesitation. No goodbye to the other staff. Just forward momentum, as if standing still meant drowning. He waited until she turned the corner before starting the engine. The armored black sedan rolled through the compound gates silently, sleek and predatory. Jones kept 4 car lengths back, far enough to avoid detection, close enough to track her every turn. The route started familiar, past the manicured lawns of Newark's wealthy corridor, past the iron gates and private security booths where people like him lived in fortresses. But Teresa didn't stop in the safe neighborhoods. She walked deeper into the city, crossing invisible borders that separated the protected from the forgotten. The streetlights grew sparse. The buildings grew older. Graffiti replaced landscaping. Broken windows replaced pristine glass. This was the Newark that tourists never saw, the Newark where Jones's empire had roots, but where even he rarely ventured without an armed escort. Teresa moved through it like she belonged to it. Jones followed on foot now, the sedan parked 3 blocks back in a lot that probably wouldn't have it by morning. His hand rested instinctively near the concealed weapon at his side. The gold chain around his neck felt suddenly conspicuous, a beacon advertising wealth in a place where wealth meant target. His breath formed clouds in the freezing air as he tracked her through alleys where garbage overflowed and shadows moved with purpose. She never looked back. Never slowed. Just kept walking with that terrible determination. The neighborhood deteriorated further. Abandoned cars sat on cinder blocks. Buildings wore condemnation notices like scarlet letters. A group of men huddled around a barrel fire, their eyes tracking Jones with the kind of calculation that recognized another predator. He ignored them. His focus stayed laser-locked on Teresa's small frame disappearing around corners, moving deeper into urban decay. Wind cut through the streets like knives, carrying the smell of decay and desperation. Jones's expensive shoes crunched on broken glass. His tailored coat, worth more than 3 months' rent in this neighborhood, felt obscene. Everything about his presence here felt wrong, dangerous, exposed. But he kept following. Teresa finally stopped in front of a building that should have been demolished years ago. For stories of crumbling brick, boarded windows, and a front door hanging crooked on broken hinges. This wasn't just poverty. This was the kind of place where hope went to die quietly, where people disappeared into the cracks of a system that had forgotten they existed. She disappeared inside without hesitation, the yellow envelope still clutched in trembling hands. Jones approached the building slowly, every instinct screaming warnings. This was a trap. This was an ambush. This was exactly the kind of place where powerful men got killed and their bodies never got found. But something stronger than self-preservation pulled him forward. He had to know. He had to see what secret could drive someone to live in a place like this while working in a fortress like his. He slipped through the broken door and into the darkness, following the sound of footsteps echoing up a stairwell that smelled of mold and broken dreams. The stairwell descended instead of climbed. Basement level. Jones moved like a shadow, each step calculated to avoid the boards that screamed betrayal underfoot. The walls wept moisture. Exposed pipes dripped somewhere in the darkness. The smell hit him first: mildew, poverty, and something chemical he couldn't identify. He followed the sound of movement to a door at the end of a hallway where the ceiling sagged dangerously low. Light leaked through the gap at the bottom, pale and flickering. Voices. Soft. Desperate. Jones pressed against the wall and found his vantage point, a rusted ventilation grate near the floor, partially broken, offering a fractured view into the room beyond. What he saw stopped his heart. The space was barely 10 feet square. No furniture except a thin mattress on the concrete floor and a folding chair that had seen better decades. A single bare bulb swung from a wire, casting shadows that made everything look even more hopeless. The walls were bare brick, crumbling at the edges, streaked with water damage and despair. And in the center of it all, a child. She couldn't have been more than 7. Small for her age, fragile in the way that sickness makes people fragile. Her skin held a grayish pallor that spoke of too many hospital visits and not enough sunlight. She was hooked to a portable oxygen concentrator that hummed and wheezed like it might give up at any moment, tubes running to her nose, her small chest rising and falling with visible effort. Sophia. It had to be Sophia. Teresa knelt beside her daughter on the cold concrete floor, still wearing her work uniform, the yellow envelope now open in her shaking hands. Jones watched as she pulled out the papers inside. Medical bills, he realized. Statement after statement. Numbers that climbed into figures that would devastate anyone, let alone someone making a maid's salary. Mama? The child's voice was thin, reedy. Is it bad news again? Teresa's face crumbled. She pressed her lips together hard, trying to hold back the flood, but tears spilled anyway, running tracks through the makeup she wore to hide the evidence of previous crying. She pulled the papers close to her chest and then, in a gesture of pure defeat, began tearing them into pieces. "We'll figure it out, baby," Teresa whispered, her voice breaking on every syllable. "Mama always figures it out. You just rest now. Just rest." But Sophia saw through the lie. Children always did. "How much do we owe?" "Don't you worry about that. That's Mama's job." Jones Carrillo, who had broken men twice his size, who had watched rivals beg for mercy without flinching, who had built an empire on the foundation of absolute emotional control, felt something crack inside his chest. There was no conspiracy here. No betrayal. No scheme to destroy him or steal from him or expose his operations to federal investigators. There was only a mother trying to keep her child alive with cleaning supplies sold for cash and leftovers stolen from his mansion's kitchen. His hand found the wall to steady himself as the full weight of his mistake crushed down on him like a physical force. Sophia's coughing fit lasted nearly a minute. Each ragged breath sounded like glass grinding against glass, her small body convulsing with the effort. The oxygen machine hummed louder, struggling to compensate. Teresa held her daughter against her chest, one hand rubbing circles on her back, the other clutching the torn pieces of medical bills like they might spontaneously transform into something she could actually pay. When the coughing finally subsided, Sophia whimpered, "Mama, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I know." Teresa's voice cracked. She began to hum, low and broken, a melody that might have been beautiful once, but now carried the weight of too many sleepless nights and impossible choices. Through the vent, Jones recognized it. A lullaby. The kind mothers sang to children who needed comfort more than sleep. Teresa's humming dissolved into words, soft and devastated. "Hush now, my angel, close your tired eyes. Mama's here beside you, beneath these empty skies." The melody fractured. Teresa stopped, pressed her face against Sophia's hair, and the dam broke completely. "I'm so sorry, baby." The words came between sobs. I try to be strong, but the money. God, the money. I'm so sorry I'm failing you. I'm so sorry you got me as a mother instead of someone who could actually save you. You're not failing me, Mama. I am. Every day I can't pay those bills, I'm failing you. Every time they threaten to stop your treatment, that's me failing. You deserve someone who can fix this, and all I can do is steal soap and pray. Sophia's small hand found Teresa's face. You're the best mama in the world. Those words destroyed Teresa. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that had no sound left, the kind that came from drowning slowly while everyone else breathed air. Jones Carrillo, crouched in a freezing hallway with his eye pressed to a rusted grate, felt something he hadn't felt in 30 years. Shame. Not the tactical shame of a miscalculation or a deal gone wrong. Not the surface regret of collateral damage in a necessary war. This was deeper. This was the kind of shame that reached into childhood and yanked out every buried piece of humanity he'd systematically murdered to survive in his world. He thought of his mansion. 5 acres of marble and leather and things that cost more than Sophia's entire medical debt. He thought of the cash he kept in his safe, enough to pay for 100 children's treatments without even noticing the loss. He thought of the leftover food his kitchen staff threw away every night, the excess he'd never questioned because excess was power and power was survival. And here, 3 miles from his fortress, a woman who cleaned his floors was watching her daughter die because she couldn't afford to keep her alive. Tears burned behind Jones's eyes. He pressed his tattooed hand against his mouth, blocking the sound that wanted to escape. Not grief. Something worse. Recognition. The sudden, crushing understanding that he'd spent 3 decades building an empire on the graves of people exactly like Teresa Martin, and he'd never once looked down to see their faces. His worldview didn't crack. It shattered. Completely. Irrevocably. If you can't stand people like Jones Carrillo, comment, "Everyone deserves respect," and smash the like button. Only those who support pain and hardship will ignore the button. Jones didn't remember the drive back. One moment he was stumbling out of that condemned building, gulping freezing air like a drowning man. The next, he was sitting in his sedan outside his own gates, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white. The compound looked different now. Wrong. He drove through gates that cost more than Teresa's annual salary. Past fountains that consumed enough water to supply a neighborhood. Up a driveway paved with imported stone that some artisan in Italy had cut by hand for obscene amounts of money. The mansion waited, lit up like a monument to excess. Every window glowed. Every surface gleamed. 12,000 square feet of space for one man who trusted no one and loved nothing. It felt obscene. Jones walked through rooms he barely used, past furniture no one sat on, beneath chandeliers that cost more than Sophia's entire medical debt. The silence was deafening. Not peaceful. Just empty. A mausoleum for a man who'd mistaken survival for living. He poured whiskey he didn't drink and stood at the window overlooking his empire. 3 a.m. 4. 5. Time moved, but Jones stayed frozen, replaying everything he'd witnessed through that rusted grate. Sophia's cough. Teresa's broken lullaby. Those words, "I'm so sorry I'm failing you." And then it clicked. The missing inventory his accountant had mentioned last month. Small things. Cleaning supplies. Rags, soap, bleach. Nothing expensive enough to warrant investigation. Jones had dismissed it entirely. But Teresa hadn't been stealing food from his kitchen like he'd assumed. She'd been taking the cheapest, most replaceable items in his mansion, things he'd never miss, things that cost him nothing, and selling them for whatever pathetic amount of cash she could get. Probably to bodegas or neighbors. Probably for pennies on the dollar. That was her grand theft. That was her terrible betrayal. She'd taken his trash and turned it into hope. The magnitude of her sacrifice hit him like a physical blow. She worked a full shift cleaning his fortress, then walked miles through dangerous streets to a basement apartment with no heat. She rationed food. She wore inadequate clothes in freezing weather. She sold soap and rags to keep her daughter alive one more day, one more week, one more desperate month. While he sat in a mansion, surrounded by enough wealth to save 100 Sophias without even noticing the expense. Jones Carrillo had built his empire on a simple philosophy: take everything, trust no one, show no weakness. It had kept him alive. It had made him powerful. It had turned him into something that barely qualified as human. And for what? The decision crystallized as dawn broke over Newark. Cold. Absolute. Unshakable. His money was going to mean something. His power was going to serve a purpose beyond control. And Teresa Martin was never going to watch her daughter die because some pieces of paper said she couldn't afford to keep her alive. Everything was about to change. Jones summoned her at 8 a.m., exactly when she arrived for her shift. Teresa. My study. Now. Through the security camera, he watched her face drain of color. She knew. Somehow, she knew this was the end. Her hands trembled as she set down her cleaning supplies. Her steps toward his door carried the weight of someone walking toward execution. She entered to find him standing at the window, back turned, hands clasped behind him. The morning light caught the tattoos on his neck, the gold chain that probably cost more than her daughter's last hospital stay. He was perfectly still, terrifyingly calm. Sir, Sit. His voice was quiet, not angry. Somehow that made it worse. I'd rather stand, sir. I said sit. Jones turned, and Teresa saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Not rage. Not calculation. Something else. Something that made her knees weak. He pushed a leather chair forward with one hand. Gestured to it. Teresa collapsed into it, and the dam broke. I'm so sorry. The words tumbled out between sobs. I know you know. I know you must have cameras or someone saw me. I never took money. I swear to God I never took money. Just cleaning supplies. Just rags and soap and bleach. Things I thought you wouldn't miss. Things I could sell for a few dollars. Jones said nothing. Just watched her unravel. My daughter, Sophia, she's sick. Really sick. The treatments cost. I can't even say how much. The insurance from this job covers some, but not enough. Never enough. I was going to lose her. Teresa's voice cracked completely. I was going to watch my baby die because I couldn't afford to keep her alive. So I took your trash, and I sold it, and I know that makes me a thief, and I know I deserve to be fired, but please don't fire me before the end of the month. The insurance doesn't kick in for another job for 90 days, and Sophia can't wait 90 days. She doesn't have 90 days. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that came from the bottom of someone's soul. Please. Not for me. I don't matter. But Sophia, she's 7 years old, and she's never done anything wrong, and she deserves to live. Please. The study filled with the sound of Teresa Martin's world ending. Jones Carrillo walked slowly to his desk, pulled out a chair, sat down across from her, not behind the power position of his massive desk, but at eye level. Human to human. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been emotion. Teresa, look at me. She raised her tear-streaked face. You're not fired. The words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. You're not fired, he repeated. And your daughter is going to live. Do you understand me? Sophia is going to live. Teresa stared at him, confusion and desperate hope warring on her face. I followed you last night, Jones said quietly. I saw everything. Hit subscribe now if you demand justice for Teresa Martin. We must stand up against the poverty that cripples the good people. Teresa's hands shook. I don't understand. Jones leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the posture of someone delivering news that would change everything. I followed you last night. Through the streets. To that building. I saw Sophia. I heard everything. Teresa's face went white. You were there? I was there. His voice carried no anger, no judgment, just a strange, weighted honesty. I saw your daughter hooked to that machine. I heard you sing to her. I heard you apologize for failing when you're the only thing keeping her alive. Oh God. Teresa covered her mouth, fresh tears spilling. Listen to me carefully. Jones's tone shifted to something Teresa had never heard from him before, not commanding, but certain. This is what's going to happen. You and Sophia are moving into the compound. There's a guest house on the east side, 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, completely private. It's yours. No rent. No conditions. Teresa shook her head, not understanding. Sir, I can't. You can and you will. Sophia needs around-the-clock care, and she's going to get it. I have doctors on retainer. The best specialists in the country. They'll be here tomorrow to evaluate her. Whatever she needs, medications, treatments, surgery, experimental trials, it's handled. Unconditionally. Forever. Why? The word came out broken. Why would you do this? Jones was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with something he'd spent 30 years burying. Because I've spent my entire life building an empire on fear and control. I've accumulated more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I've crushed anyone who stood in my way. I've turned myself into a weapon, and I told myself that was strength. He met her eyes directly. Then I watched you steal soap to save your daughter. I watched you sacrifice everything, risk everything for someone else. And I realized I've never done a single thing in my life that mattered. Not really. Not the way your love for Sophia matters. Teresa's breath hitched. You showed me what it means to be a real parent. Hell, what it means to be a real person. Jones's voice cracked. And you saved me from my own damn grave. You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. What? Purpose. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Real purpose. Not power. Not control. Something that actually matters when you close your eyes at night. Teresa began to cry again, but this time not from despair. From disbelief. From hope she was afraid to touch. Your daughter is going to live, Teresa. And I'm going to use every resource I have to make sure of it. That's not charity. That's me finally doing something right with this blood money I've been sitting on. He stood, extended his hand. Not as a boss to an employee. As one human being to another. Do we have an agreement? Teresa took his hand, and the fortress that had been built on violence and isolation opened its gates to something it had never held before. Love. Purpose. Redemption. Don't scroll. Subscribe to our channel if you believe true power is used to help, not to hurt. We are fighting the evil of indifference. 6 months changed everything. The guest house on the east side of the compound transformed overnight from sterile emptiness into something Jones had never witnessed within his walls, a home. Sophia's medical equipment arrived first, sleek and state-of-the-art, nothing like the wheezing portable concentrator from that basement apartment. Then came the specialists, flown in from Johns Hopkins and Stanford, their only instruction to save her life regardless of cost. And they did. The compound that once echoed with calculated silence now rang with something Jones couldn't have imagined, a child's laughter. Real, unburdened, healthy laughter. Sophia ran through the gardens he'd commissioned, but never enjoyed, her small feet leaving prints on imported stone, her voice carrying through bulletproof windows that suddenly seemed less like protection and more like prison bars he was finally dismantling. She started calling him Uncle Jones 3 weeks after moving in. The first time she said it, standing in his study doorway with paint-stained fingers from art therapy, asking if he wanted to see her drawing, Jones felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed for 30 years. He said yes. He always said yes. Teresa flourished too, the weight of desperation lifting from her shoulders until she stood straighter, smiled easier, lived instead of merely survived. She still worked, refusing anything that felt like charity, but now she worked from a place of dignity rather than desperation. Her daughter slept in a real bed with clean sheets and hope for tomorrow. But Jones's transformation didn't stop at his gates. The empire he'd built on blood money found new purpose. Anonymous clinics opened across California and Nevada, state-of-the-art facilities focused on rare childhood diseases, staffed by the best doctors his connections could recruit. No insurance required. No questions asked. No child turned away because some piece of paper said they couldn't afford to live. His fortress became exactly what Teresa's love had shown him it could be, a sanctuary. Not for isolation and control, but for protection of those who needed it most. Jones Carrillo still carried tattoos that marked his violent past. His empire still operated in shadows. But now, when he closed his eyes at night, he heard Sophia's laughter instead of his victim's screams. Purpose. Real purpose. The kind that made breathing feel less like survival and more like living.